Divine command theory. It was the dominant theory of morality for Lord knows how long, for quite a long time. The monotheistic religions really took it on, but I believe that all religious traditions, especially in the ancient world, held this to some degree. Now, what is it? It holds that an action has a claim to morality if and only if that action is commanded by a god or the gods. This can exist in any religion, but it seems especially the so-called revealed religions that have a claim of divine or semi-divine origins for their sacred texts encapsulate this idea very often. In this theory, religion is the criterion for whether or not something is good. It can be only good if the deity, but in actuality, if the religion commands it, and thereby the people who made the religion, although, of course, the claim is that there's a divine or semi-divine origin for these texts. So, let's take it at face value and see if there's problems. Well, before that, let's talk about its applicability. I mentioned that in the revealed religions, it's a commonly used theory, even implicitly by many people, or explicitly. However, it existed in the polytheistic religions, as I mentioned, and one of the earliest, or the earliest, that we have encapsulations of a dilemma, a problem with this is called Euthyphro's dilemma. Now, this is one of Plato's dialogues in which a pre-trial Socrates is sitting there and thinking about his upcoming trial for impiety. And so he asks this guy, Euthyphro, if he considers it to be moral, what he's doing there. And basically the guy says that he is there to prosecute his own father for kind of advertently but inadvertently killing the slave who had killed somebody. And so they get into a discussion about what it means to be pious. In the context of filial piety, is it pious to... You weren't supposed to bring charges. Only the family of the bereaved were supposed to bring charges. So it was kind of highly unusual for Euthyphro to be bringing charges against, especially then his own father. There's issues of filial piety that had to be broken in order for Euthyphro to bring the charge. Now, Euthyphro is described as being a prophet. We don't really have any other information about him other than in this dialogue. Many people seem to think that he was made up by Plato for the purpose of the dialogue. That might be the case. His name means something like right thinking, which could be irony on his part, because at the end of it, you find that it ends in basically a conundrum. Something called a... what is it called? A contradiction. It's, we'll forget about that. The basis of his worry of their argument is a thing loved by the gods because it is holy, or is it holy because it's loved by the gods? And Euthyphro comes up with several answers, but they're all basically, they're unsatisfactory. Therefore, it ends kind of circularly. So let's get into some problems about this. I've gone on long. Problem one. Well, in this case, there's no eternal, unchanging, or unchangeable principles that define morality. It's therefore a moving target. The deity could, being omnipotent, command an act which had been immoral, that is, commanded against. Say, for instance, murder. Now has to be done. This would make all acts to have no inherent, implicit moral value. Conversely, if the deity could not make a call that is wrong or immoral, that is what I mean to say, this hamstrings its omnipotence. And at least that aspect of its character would have to be thrown out. You couldn't have a completely omnipotent God because here it is not being able to do something. It's really kind of another form of the question meant to be a stumbling block for monotheists, I suppose. Could God create a rock so heavy he couldn't pick it up? It's essentially that. The rock in this case being an immoral act. Could God pick up a rock? Could he do something immoral? You know what I'm trying to say. If he couldn't, you'd have to throw that out. Or if it could make an immoral call and keep the category, like meaning something still immoral would become something that is immoral, but it still would be right to do. If this is the case, it completely debases the entire category of morality. And really, in that case, we should throw out, instead of that aspect of God's character, we should throw out that aspect of valuation. We shouldn't have the category of morality because it's meaningless. And we should really have something more like whim, like God's whim. I guess we would just use the term moral as a kind of a stand-in. To me, so either morality has an ontological basis, meaning so either morality has some actual reality, it has a ground level basis that it exists, or it doesn't. What would it mean if it did? This would mean that either there are at least co-eternal qualities or metaphysical categories which exist alongside God or gods. And if there isn't, or within the context of God interacting with humanity, God only does what is for the good. This means that either there are at least co-eternal qualities or metaphysical categories which exist alongside God or gods, or there isn't. Or within the context of God interacting with humanity, God only does what is for the good. There doesn't seem to be an obvious way to preserve both omnipotence and omnibenevolence without resorting to divine command theory in a monotheistic conception of God in which that God's all-powerful. There doesn't seem to be an obvious way to preserve both omnipotence and omnibenevolence without resorting to divine command theory, which has such a stilted definition of morality in this case that I don't think it really counts as morality anymore. If it is even conceptually possible that it could be commanded that atrocities suddenly become blessed, there's at least something very wrong with the world. If that is the case, that it can become right to do something immoral, or that the category of immorality doesn't exist, then that's a objectively bad world to live in, or I guess subjectively, but I think almost anyone would say subjectively that that would be bad. You might psychologically learn to deal with it. There might be, if we did live in such a world and we did have a mind, either everything would have to be predestined, in which case we are essentially conscious cogs in a gears in a machine. We're like conscious. In that case, why would we be made conscious? If there's a God that wants conscious beings to exist, but he's so beyond the ability, he's beyond the ability to not be aware and in control of everything that's happening in the universe in a deterministic sense. And this is getting into other stuff, but that would preclude free will. This isn't so much an issue in Christianity, or at least where the mental gymnastics have landed is in somewhat of a gray area between determinism and free will, indeterminacy, or some kind of qualified determinacy within, or indeterminacy within a deterministic system. That as we at least have the choice to make a choice, even in a universe where everything is unstoppably marching towards its eschatological end, that is Judgment Day or whatever. However, there are other monotheistic religions and even certain strands of Christianity well within the Protestant sphere of the Protestant ecology of ideas, such as famously the Calvinists. The John Calvin was a determinist, as is Sunni Islam, the dominant form of Islam, that normative Islam that exists today. It's a deterministic theology. To them, nothing can, to Calvin or to a Sunni theologian, nothing can be more powerful than God's self-determination. Nothing, including the idea of free will, nothing can be outside of the power of God, because otherwise it would that would be a limited idea of God, in which, in those conceptions, God is completely all-powerful to the point and omniscient to where he knows everything you're going to do before you do it. If that's the case, and God knows everything you're going to do before you do it, that would render any crime punishment or sin blessedness dichotomy completely meaningless, because we would be in this deterministic hamster wheel universe, clock gear universe, where everything marched according to plan, in which case it seems like a torture to give these automata, which essentially we would be in that conception, any kind of mind. Why would we have a mind? And especially, why would we be rewarded or punished for things we did if it's all written in Allah or God or whatever's book as to what's going to happen, and especially where you're going to end up? My stepmom calls these ways of thinking the frozen chosen. I think that's like maybe Presbyterians, or I forget what branch she was talking about specifically, but any of these deterministic things, the frozen chosen, in that there will be certain people are chosen by God to be blessed, to do the right thing, to do what he commands to be moral, and others he gives a spirit of rebelliousness, or actually writes in his book that certain things, that this person's going to do certain things that I hate or don't like, and therefore they'll be punished. And then to make the punishment or reward eternal seems to be the cherry on top of ridiculousness. And you can only ascribe to this if you really go hardcore into the mental acrobatics. Now, I say that from experience, having had a multi-year run-in with monotheism. Over it now, but to me, all of this that I've said, and please forgive the tangent there into whether predestination is real or not, or makes any sense. But to me, all of this begins to put big cracks in any monotheistic interpretation, which posits a God who is all-powerful. In my view, if there's a God, or an ultimate level of existence beyond this four-dimensional universe we live in, this four-dimensional intelligible world, then beings such as I can even begin to conceive of would not have any kind of list of commandments, rules, anything like that. Rather, if they had any sense of our kind of conception of morality, as beings existing in like differentiated multiplicity, like all these different similar but individual multiple minds. To me, that's the only definition that makes sense of morality, is in that frame of reference, the frame of reference of multiple different minds, and here's the crux, that interaction. Morality is a quality of the way we interact. For it to be something as arbitrary as a command seems like a ridiculous idea to me. But yeah, for beings such as us, if they did have a conception of morality in regards to beings such as us, then it would have to have at its foundation nothing different than what we could arrive at ourselves. That is, if there's a morality that exists co-eternal, if it's a qualitative thing about the way we're interacting with each other and with the world around us and with the future generations and with other sentient beings, the only conception of morality is like an idea. It's not an act. There's only acts that coincide with that idea or not. Are these beings helping or hurting each other? And in that case, we don't need them to come up with it. There's nobody coming up with it. It's just clear what it hurts or helps. So what would we arrive at by ourselves? There's plenty of theories to go around, but the explanations with the most weight in my book are those that emphasize maximizing well-being, with well-being being the crux, and the effects of actions on people. Read all sentient beings. That is, what is moral is that which does, and what's immoral is that which does not. So what is moral is what I said. What helps sentient beings, and what is immoral is what hurts sentient beings. Therefore, it would be impossible for a deity to make it to be the opposite, even if it were possible to command something bad. Now, I'm not saying that if there is a God, it couldn't command something bad, but I'm saying that that would not be moral. So that's my argument. That's my take on divine command theory. I would also, as a little addendum, or, whatever you call it, addendum, I'd say, since we are not receiving unambiguous messages from the divine that brook no interpretation and require no further thought, and come from some place other than one of our fellow human beings, since that's not happening, there's no way for us to say that this or that is a command. You have to take it on faith at some point that what's in that book is from God, or what's coming out of this guy's mouth, he's not just making it up. You have to assume at some point, make the leap of faith that you're getting a divine command and not just some guy's command. So I'd say that last little bit makes it basically impossible to have anybody be, even if one person disagrees with what's in the book, it's ambiguous at that point. It has become an ambiguous thing. So I'll leave it there. I've probably really gone over what I should have, but